This is the Huawei Mate 40 Pro, and even though I only got to spend about an hour with the device, I can already tell that it has almost everything you need in a high-end Android flagship smartphone. Almost, and I'm not even exaggerating, just look at it. It's a gorgeous smartphone. Sure, you might say that looks can be subjective, but I'd also argue that build quality isn't, and the Mate 40 Pro's build feels right out there with the best of them. This phone feels well engineered, and that's not really surprising to me. Huawei's flagships have always been arguably one of the best made devices in the market, and I think that this DNA is evident here. Every seam feels like it has been machined close to perfection with a selection of materials that feel expensive in the hand. The screen curves and bleeds over the edge probably more than any other phone in the market right now, and it looks wild. In fact, it goes so far over the edge that Huawei's basically had to put the buttons on the back of the device, but it still works because these tactile buttons still feel comfortable and nice to press, even at that extreme angle. And yes, I said buttons because Huawei has finally come to their senses and reinstated the volume rocker right above the power button, so you don't have to deal with that bullshit virtual volume rocker from the Mate 30 Pro anymore. If I had any criticisms of the body, it would simply be that I prefer the more squared off shape of its predecessor, but I think that that's more of a personal thing. Speaking of the screen, the Huawei Mate 40 Pro has an excellent combination of specs here. The 6.67-inch panel pushes a resolution of 2772 by 1344 pixels, meaning it's nice and sharp. Plus, it's an AMOLED screen, so you get those vibrant colors and beautiful contrast too. On top of that, it features a refresh rate of 90 Hz, which for me is the sweet spot right now. It's fast enough for you to enjoy the smoothness of having a high refresh rate screen while being, less taxing on the battery than something like a 144Hz screen probably would. I also really appreciate the fact that this phone comes with a pair of stereo speakers. I was always never sure why Huawei seems so hesitant to put these on all their flagship smartphones, but I'm glad that it's here. The speakers sound good too, good left and right balance with a nice and full sound. I like that the vocals come through clearly, which is not something I can say for all stereo speakers. Huawei also didn't slack when it comes to performance. It features their best and probably last Kirin processor, the Kirin 9000 5G. Paired with 8GB of RAM and 256GB of internal storage, you should be able to expect flagship level performance out of this device. I didn't have much time with it, so I can't really say how it performs, but I don't think that it will be a slouch. Perhaps the weakest link here when it comes to internal specs is the 4400 mAh battery. Granted, it's not a small cell, but I would have liked to see a 5000 mAh battery instead, because right now it's smaller than a lot of its competition. Still, I'm not saying that this will have bad battery life, because the capacity could be offset by the more efficient 5nm processor, but for a big device targeted at the power user, I think 5000 mAh should be the minimum. Huawei does balance this out with 66W fast wired charging and 50W fast wireless charging, so that's nice to see. Although the camera isn't usually the focal point for the Huawei Mate series, the Mate 40 Pro does come with what looks like a very capable triple camera setup. There's a 50MP ultra vision camera, a 20MP cine camera with an ultra wide lens, as well as a 12MP optically stabilized periscope telephoto camera that gives it 5x optical zoom. This means that the Mate 40 Pro takes really nice photos and is also capable of 50x max zoom. I also like that Huawei's added the little viewfinder picture-in-picture thing so that you can actually tell where your camera is pointed at when you're at max zoom. There's also what looks like a fourth camera on the module, but Huawei tells me that that's a laser camera for autofocusing and AI focus tracking. From what I can tell, you can turn this AI focus tracking feature on, then lock onto your subject and the camera will follow it. It seems a lot like what I've already seen on devices like the Vivo X50 Pro, but I couldn't really test it out in this short time frame that I had with the smartphone. Up front, you've got a dual selfie camera setup with a 13 megapixel camera paired with a 3D depth sensing camera, which isn't unlike what we've already seen from Huawei. Biggest difference here is that there is no notch because the cameras now live in a punch hole instead. Besides the solid main specs, the Huawei Mate 40 Pro also comes with your typical collection of useful flagship features and gimmicky flagship features. For example, this phone comes with IP68 dust and water resistance as well as support for Huawei's M Pen stylus, which is great to see. But it also comes with the gimmicky AI hand gesture controls thing that apparently have been upgraded, but it still looks absolutely ridiculous. With a flagship package as complete as this, I should be really happy for the Mate 40 Pro, and I commend Huawei on fixing the smaller gimmicks and giving people a great selection of practical specs with really good hardware. But I'm actually sad. I'm sad because the Huawei Mate 40 Pro has the same issue that pretty much every other new Huawei smartphone does, and it's the same reason why I can't really recommend this device to anyone. Now, if you don't care about Google or if you're okay with the security risks of sideloading or pedal search or whatever it is that you want to call it, then you don't have to watch this video anymore. I've said pretty much everything that I want to say about the Huawei Mate 40 Pro. But I do want to monologue just a little bit because contrary to what a lot of you angry Huawei fans who like to call me names in the comments believe, I was actually a big fan of Huawei smartphones. Ever since the Huawei P9, I've always been impressed with their flagship smartphones because they were genuinely good, and what Huawei provided was meaningful competition at the high end of the Android flagship market. I bet Samsung must have been terrified, like seeing how much Huawei improved year after year. So yeah, I was really upset when I found out that they lost GMS support, but I was even more upset when I saw how they responded to it. Because who's going to compete with Samsung at the high-end Android market now? Who can provide the same kind of products or services? Like, no one. At least no one has. And we've seen the effect that this has had on the industry. I mean, do you remember paying 4,999 ringgit for a 128 gig Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra? Like, that must not have felt good. But what's even sadder is that, we don't even know if Huawei is going to make any more flagship Android smartphones. The Huawei Mate 40 Pro might be the last of its kind, but I guess the bright side here is that if it had to end with one smartphone, at least the Huawei Mate 40 Pro is looking like an appropriate swan song. Alright, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts on the Huawei Mate 40 Pro in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this, you can subscribe to us, click on the notification bell icon. You can also like us on Facebook, but our home on the internet will always be at searchandchow.com. What do you think of the Mate 40 Pro? Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. But yeah, I'm gonna call it for this video. Enough ranting. I'm Rory, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.